Thank you for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends all, greetings. Let me first say how much of an honor it is to be asked to speak here at this, the 11th annual conference of the English Department. It brings together international and local scholars and subject specialists in the humanities. I am pleased to count myself among members of our UB Humanities faculty and to belong to the Media Studies Department. I would like to acknowledge Deputy Vice Chancellor Professor Happy Sipambe, Acting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities Professor Fidelis Nkomazana, Deputy Dean Professor Tapelo Otlowetswe, Head of the Department of English Professor Bawasi, other heads of department including my own head Dr. William Lesita-Okana, Chair of the Conference Organizing Committee Mr. Daniel Koketso, conference participants, colleagues, friends all, Dumelan, or as we say in Jamaica, Watagalang. As some of you may know, I have been on leave over the past few weeks, and so I speak to you today from my native Jamaica, the land of sprinters such as Usain Bolt, Shelley Ann Fraser, and of musical artists like Bob Marley, Jimmy Cliff, and Peter Tosh. It is the land also of poet Claude McKay, of cultural studies specialist Stuart Hall, and of many other creative artists. Looking retrospectively, we have also benefited from the insights of a stellar group of African literary scholars who have also been bridge builders, leading social scientists, political activists, and inspirational development thinkers. We refer to authors such as Chinua Achebe, Peter Abrahams, Buchi Emecheta, Wole Soyinka, Nadine Gordimer, and of course, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, among others. Their messages and linkages across continents, in the global south and elsewhere, are indeed profound. Peter Abrahams, for example, was born in South Africa and lived the greater part of his life in Jamaica as a distinguished novelist. Abrahams' life in exile and his travels are reminiscent of those of your distinguished novelist Bessie Amelia Emery, popularly known as Bessie Head, who, though born in South Africa, spent a significant part of her life and creative energies in Botswana. We also call to mind the Guyanese Caribbean political scientist Walter Rodney, who drew inspiration from his tenure at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to write the landmark book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Another writer, C.L.R. James, penned the classic book, The Black Jacobins, about the Haitian Revolution, a book that has been very much a classic here in the Caribbean and in Africa. It is Ngugi wa Thiong'o who quoted Caribbean Guyanese poet Martin Carter as being the inspiration for some of his writings. And he alluded to one of the most famous poems of Martin Carter. And I give you a few lines of that poem. If you see me looking at your hands, listening when you speak, marching in your ranks, you must know I do not dream, but dream to change the world. This is Martin Carter's universal appeal for the scholar's role in social transformation. We are therefore reminded by wa Thiong'o, among others, that literature and language, especially in the African continent, are not passive disciplines, but are deeply embedded in the active political struggle for decolonization and for our identity. They operate in contexts that are constantly changing and requiring endless commitment. It is this commitment that enabled Ngugi wa Thiong'o to write in his native tongue as part of his efforts better to be understood by his people. As I proceed, I must congratulate the English department, the Faculty of Humanities, and the University of Botswana as a whole for hosting and sustaining this international conference into its 11th staging. This event is taking place in a year of unprecedented upheavals and stringencies caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. You are to be commended for keeping this torch alight and for organizing this conference in this year through virtual means, despite or perhaps because of the destabilizing winds of epidemic disease. I take due note of your insightful conference theme, the interface between language, literature, creative works, and social media. It is a relevant theme, and it is also an engaging theme. I gather we have a wide range of scholars with papers to be presented at this conference on many aspects of this theme. For my part, I will take as a point of departure a subset of your broader theme, and so invite you to reflect with me on the topic technopoly and the newly emerging logosphere. Reflections on the digital transformation of language and culture. I will offer some brief contextual remarks about technologies, the internet, and our communities. I will reflect on the interface between such technologies and our language. And I will use Neil Postman's fascinating notion of technopoly as a bridge to better understanding the world in which we are now operating. I will conclude with some perspectives on the humanities within the emerging technological and linguistic landscape in which we are operating. I would like to call attention to a key injunction issued by New Age author Marilyn Ferguson, and I quote, "Power is changing hands from dying hierarchies to living networks. New intellectual and physical tools are required to deal with an era in which global communications have encircled our world beyond any possibility of retreat," close quotes. As we shall see, this current surfeit of new technologies is not without its challenges, but we must also recognize the adage that says we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that created them. This mantra was recognized by the activist scholars and innovators of the great African city of Timbuktu. Its literary and scientific artifacts remind us that this West African trading city in Mali was indeed an early center of global intellectual development and scholarly innovation in the centuries between the 14th and 15th, in the period between the 14th and the 16th centuries. The artifacts that are to be found in Timbuktu and also in the libraries of Egypt remind us that the African continent has been very present and played a historical role of significance at the dawn of many of the foundational technologies, designs, and theories that now drive innovation in this present era. The historical link between culture and technology remains inescapable, but an issue that has engaged our minds for decades is the question of whether technology is enhancing or undermining established culture. In the end, there may not be a neat answer that satisfies all analysts, but in the contemplation of one renowned scholar, Neil Postman, the resounding answer is that global human culture is being made to surrender to the dictates and impositions of technology. Postman was a professor of English education with a focus on culture and technology based at the New York University. His overarching concern was about the impact of technology on language and on culture, as indicated in the title of his 1992 book, Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology. He argues that this relationship is an unequal one, a bargain struck in which technology giveth and technology taketh away, but also one in which radical technologies create new definitions of old terms, and that this process takes place without our being fully conscious of it. On this topic, it's worth listening to Postman for just a little bit. He argues that new technologies introduce new terms to the language. In our own time, we have consciously added to our language thousands of new words and phrases having to do with technology. Such changes occur quickly, surely, and in a sense, silently. Lexicographers hold no plebiscites on the matter. No manuals are written to explain what is happening, and the schools are often oblivious of it. Continuing, Postman notes that technology imperiously commandeers our most important terminologies. It redefines freedom, truth, intelligence, fact, wisdom, memory, history, all the words that we live by. And it does not pause to tell us, and we often ourselves do not pause to ask. It is clear through the eyes of not only Postman, but also of the likes of Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, British theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, and Kenyan social environmentalist Wangari Maathai, that there is a price to be paid by our culture and by the environment for accommodating or adopting emerging technologies, often without question. Writing on the broader political context, Postman posited the view that the world was entering into what he called a period of technopoly, where technology reigns supreme over all other aspects of life. In such a technopoly, he argues, efficiency is the primary goal of labor. Technical calculations are superior to human judgment, and anything that cannot be measured is either ignored or devalued. Precision and objectivity, he argues, are valued above all else. Postman is critical, evidently, of such a state of technopoly, arguing that its primary focus on measurement and data over feelings and subjectivity can destroy everything that makes us human. He argues that this hyper-focus on technology creates a culture without a moral foundation. Science becomes the new moral authority in a situation where science is not set up to speak to issues of right or wrong. And it is this issue of what kind of world we are living in and what kind of world we are going to bequeath to our children that presents us with the central question of our dialogue today. We cannot lose sight of the impact that technology has been having on culture. It's a price that has been exacted in skill sets, in memory, in meaning, and in loss of minority languages. But Postman's view on the impact of technology on language appears to be contradicted by Daniel Heiber, in whose analysis technology can play and is playing an important role in culture and particularly in the domain of languages. Heiber argues, and I quote him, that the ever-increasing availability of new technologies, from visual to oral archiving, to digitization of textual resources and electronic mapping, have the potential to revolutionize the documentation, the analysis, and the revitalization of endangered languages for the linguist and for the indigenous community alike. Heiber argues further that technology can both further and increase the possibility of academic collaboration and community involvement among linguistic minorities. Issues of searchability and interoperability loom large in online linguistic environments with differing searching conventions or with incompatible software and work tools. He is engaged with an important question of how one searches for materials across different languages or across inconsistent glossing conventions. The impulse, he argues, is the tendency towards standardization. Among the solutions posited is the use of a well-designed interface. But this can sometimes be intractable and inappropriate. Heiber's argument here, important as it is clearly addressing operational and remedial issues in the presentation or recovery of endangered minority languages, and not necessarily invalidating Postman's broader thesis about the impact of technology on language and culture. Heiber is concerned in substantial part with projects and methods that can rehabilitate minority languages using enhanced applications, including, quote, the repurposing of a technology for uses other than its original intended ones. He cites a website originally launched with the sole intention of making a particular language material publicly available, but which later came to function as a linguistic corpus for tracking usage, for lexical variations, for neologisms, and also as a primitive spell checker. An important part of a global technology impact is indeed a loss of language, reflected in a limited presence of African and other global South languages online. It is estimated by the firm W3 Techs that of the top 10 million websites on the World Wide Web as of March 2021, 60% are in English. This is followed by 8.6% in Russian. The next 8 places are dominated, though not exclusively, by European languages. There are no African languages to be found in the top 10 spots in this ranking. Arabic, which is spoken in several African countries, was the 11th ranked language on the web. Other African languages featured in this ranking are used by 0.1% of the studied websites. Now, this is a reflection of the weak presence of African websites published in indigenous languages online. It also reflects the heavy emphasis placed on English by most web content providers all over the world, and the insufficiently developed culture of uploading local content in native languages. Redressing this is a project that could be actively undertaken by university departments of African languages and literatures as part of a process of decolonization and indigenous content uploading. Heiber justifiably introduces the question of what is really meant by the term technology and its relationship with the linguistic domains. In this context, it is worth traversing some of the broader global technology affordances that interface with creativity, that interface with pedagogy, or with our usages of language in the culture. Many of the foremost arguments advanced around the implications of the 21st century technologies in relation to our lives are to be found in the discourses related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, otherwise called 4IR. In contrast with Postman, Charles Schwab of the World Economic Forum invited readers of his 2016 book on 4IR to think about the staggering confluence of emerging technology breakthroughs covering wide-ranging fields such as artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, etc. This, colleagues, is the techno-industrial landscape in which we must operate. As we build out our digital presence and visibility, we are confronted with a burgeoning growth in online channels and social media outlets. The content in these channels often take the form of video clips, memes, and graphic elements that often substitute for textual language. At the start of this year, 2021, it was estimated that 500 hours of video are uploaded on YouTube every minute worldwide. That is 30,000 hours of video uploaded every hour, and 720,000 hours of video uploaded every day on YouTube alone, which is only one of a number of other video-based platforms available online. For its part, Facebook's own 2.8 billion monthly active users generate multiples of billions of video clips, microblogs, and visually based graphic memes daily. These statistics have important implications for our perception and use of online communication outlets in the 21st century. One major zone of language alteration is the elaborate use of acronyms and slangs. They have so proliferated that we can now classify them into subgroups in which they exist and operate. For example, network-specific social media acronyms, business and professional social media acronyms, technical acronyms, slang and conventional acronyms, social media-specific acronyms. We know them from LOL and OMG, IDK, to the more business-oriented B2B, B2C, ROI, then ISP, CXUI, URL, and others. These are additions to the usages that we are now experiencing through technology. Similarly, many words have acquired or repurposed their meanings. Program, for example, footprint, profile, what is a friend, a handle, a cloud, what is a tweet, etc. Indeed, taken to the logical 21st century digital representations, we are talking about the rise of a culture of new words, of the designed image, of GIFs, of emoticons and other expressions representing an idea or a mood. It is about the wider use of symbolic words and acronyms and the rapid growth of instant exchanges using video clips and emoticons. This may be described as the rise of a new logosphere, borrowed from the Russian literary scholar M. Bakhtin, who used it in 1937 in an essay that deals with literary theory and the philosophy of language. The idea of a logosphere was later emerging in the context of discourses to do with the psychographics of radio, the power of the spoken word to connect people. This occurred at a time when radio was the main electronic link connecting people in the way that the internet does now. The path followed by radio is being replicated with the rise of what Castells describes as the network society, with blogging, and with the resurgence of the visual in this notion of the logosphere. It combines a global reach with the individuality and subjectivity of early radio. In it, the very nature of language is changing to more symbolic uses that are understood and employed, particularly by younger demographic groups. The language of the new logosphere changes constantly, leaving prior generations with older usages. There we can see the difference between the digital natives and the digital migrants in terms of the usages. The notion of a logosphere has lent its name to such descriptors in the current lingo of the Twitter sphere and the blogosphere, themselves being new words denoting where specialized communities of interest and activity are domiciled. The new logosphere is a virtual environment without disciplinary or even geographical boundaries. It leaves us to question the veracity of Wittgenstein's 1922 mantra that the boundaries of my language define the boundaries of my world. We are experiencing perhaps a significant transformation of both. Scholars the world over are already adapting their pedagogy to this changing language environment. Student-centered education requires an understanding of the constructs used by the Generation X and its successor cohorts that are emerging from an online educational context caused by COVID-19, in which there is even greater reliance on the digital and online tools. This does not mean that we should surrender our knowledge and use and teaching of the linguistic conventions, but we must infuse our scholarship and our teaching with a knowledge and understanding of the forces that are changing the language and that are driving society to become closer to what Postman spoke about as the technopoly. This is what Ferguson meant. This process of change, this process of disruption is what Ferguson meant by power is changing hands from dying hierarchies to living networks. We also have to be part of those living networks. Let me turn finally to the impact of these technological developments on the academy, and in particular on the humanities, of which language and literature are integral parts. It is also a time, as what Thiongo and others affirmed, of transformation and decolonization. In the Caribbean, the old Department of English Literature was changed to become the Department of Literatures in English, to recognize the increasing creation of excellent literature in altered forms of the English language, not emerging from England. At the same time, we must seek to write and publish internationally in our own native tongue, to create an appetite for other languages and for literature driven from within our countries and from within our institutions. The traditional role of the humanities was to offer a rigorous and analytical grasp of human phenomena and to provide an immersion into higher order aspects of life, such as justice, freedom, humility. For U.S. Professor Deborah Fitzgerald, the humanities are primarily a set of methods or approaches to understanding ourselves and others based on the development of critical thinking skills and deep immersion in the subject. But important as these attributes of the humanities are, I must argue here that they are not sufficient to sustain and to ensure the survival of the humanities going forward. This traditional approach often answers the question of what, but students and society now require a lot more. Scholarly investigations of the important questions of how should no longer be just in the domain of science, but also part of offerings within the humanities. We must intensify our inquiries into how and why society operates in the way that it does, and how it can be changed by our interventions from within our humanities disciplines. How we can apply our knowledge and our literary expertise to social issues as we serve in the role of public-facing scholars. Stuart Hall advanced this strategy as an active interventionist approach that will matter a great deal to our societies and to our students. Because this is a time of not just knowing, it is also a time of showing and doing. We can find validity in what, in how, and in why, as both the arts and the sciences seek to interpret and understand our communities and the world. Scholarly convergence is an approach to the academy that cuts across disciplinary boundaries. It integrates knowledge, it integrates tools and ways of thinking from life, as well as from such sectors as health sciences, physical, computational, engineering, and education to form a comprehensive synthetic framework for tackling societal challenges that exist in the interfaces of multiple fields. This is a scholarly tradition of disciplinary hybridity or duality that is already well established globally, including among many African and Caribbean scholars. For example, the 1963 autobiographical book by Caribbean intellectual C.L.R. James, entitled Beyond a Boundary, ostensibly reminisces about the game of cricket, but has long been deemed to be neither cricket reminiscence nor autobiography, but rather a deep philosophical dive into the anti-colonial politics of race and class in 1960s Caribbean through the prism of cricket. We can similarly find literary relevance in sports and entertainment, in heritage studies and health crises. The very title of CLR's book, Beyond the Boundary, also bears a prescient message about a greater interaction between the social sciences and the humanities. Do we dare to go beyond the silos of traditional academic disciplines and breach now insecure boundaries of the hallowed faculties and departments? Colleagues, in every era, people have needed a space to scroll, to doodle, to fulfill the abstract longing of the soul, not just of the scientific, not just for datafication, but for self-fulfillment and self-expression. It is important that art and the wider humanities allow for freedom of generating and sharing all these emanations of our creative imaginations without being commodified or without asking for anyone to agree with us. But we must also adapt to the changing and challenging times. We must reinvent ourselves, our scope, our methods, and even our content in its global placement online. Einstein, the great theoretical physicist, who was also a noted musician, has observed that art and sciences are branches of the same tree. He, like many other scientists and creatives, sought to obliterate unnecessary disciplinary boundaries. He also argued that imagination is more important than knowledge. To quote him, "For knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress." Einstein justifiably felt that having intelligent questions in mind was more important than having intelligent answers. As I close, I remind you that language and literature are highly mobile if we make them so in this logosphere. Our ideas, our books and poems are as valid and relevant as any others globally. We must innovate. We must upload, not just download. We must generate content locally and seek to grow and publish globally. And in the process of this, we must take note of the insightful advice of the 19th century American philosopher who advised us that we must not become globally the tool of our tools. I am sure that Postman, Marley, Martin Carter, Peter Abrahams, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and many other literary heroes will fully agree on the necessity to spread the capacity of our languages and the influence of our literature globally, and to help to make it be the change we want in this period of technopoly. Thank you.